Okay, so last week we talked about how to solve quadratic equations that could not be factored. How to solve quadratic equations that could not be factored. What are your two ways to solve them if they can't be factored? Good, the quadratic formula. Okay, and what else? Good, the quadratic formula and completing the square. Those are the two ways to solve quadratics if you cannot factor them. Okay, I personally like to use completing the square method when my A value is equal to 1 and my B value is even. Okay, completing the square is pretty quick and painless when your A value is 1 and your B value is even. However, when your A value is not 1 and or your B value is not even, then I recommend doing the quadratic formula. You can do either on any quadratic that's not factorable, or you could do either on any quadratic that is factorable, and you will get the correct answer. Okay, so you can use either method. Even if it's factorable, you can use either method. Okay? So, what we're going to do now is we're going to continue talking about solving quadratics, and we're going to continue talking about solving quadratics that don't always give us a rational answer. Oftentimes they give us irrational. And irrational answers are like square root of 5. Or 1 plus or minus the square root of 2. These are irrational answers. They have a square root sign in the answer. Okay, so the first thing that I want you to think about is I want you to look at this problem that we have up here. X to the fourth minus 14x squared plus 45. At first glance, you might think of that as a trinomial that can be factored. Okay? It is a trinomial that can be factored, but it looks a little different than other trinomials. What's different about this one? The exponent. What is my x raised to? The fourth, and then I've got an x raised to the second. Okay? Now, I want you to tell me, if I had x squared minus 14x plus 45, how would I factor that? X squared minus 14x plus 45. How would I factor that? Good, negative 9 and negative 5. My product is positive 45. My sum is negative 14. So that would need to be factored to negative 9 and negative 5. Okay? Now, we're going to factor x to the fourth minus 14x squared plus 45 in a very similar way. But instead of putting x, we're going to put x squared. Okay? So instead of having this x and this x, we're going to put x squared in both of those spots. Okay? We're still going to have minus 9, and we're still going to have minus 5. Okay? So I have x squared minus 9 times x squared minus 5. That's what I have. Now, if I wanted to find the solution to the problem on the right, so the problem on the right is x squared minus 14x plus 45 equals 0, and I have factored that to x minus 9 times x minus 5 equals 0. How would I find the solution to these? What would I do? Excellent. So I'm going to have x minus 9 equal to 0 and x minus 5 equal to 0. Okay? So x can be 9 and x can be positive 5. Okay? So that we've been doing for a couple chapters. Okay? Now, we're going to do the same thing here, but instead of having x minus 9 is equal to 0, we are going to have x squared minus 9 is equal to 0, and x squared minus 5 is equal to 0. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and solve for x squared, even if I'm not quite sure what to do after that. So I'm going to get x squared equals 9, and I've got x squared equals 5. Okay? And I'm hopeful that once you see x squared equals 9, that something clicks and you're like, oh, I know what to do. Does anybody know what to do? Yes, you're going to take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to take the square root and the square root. But what do I have to do with that square root on the right-hand side? What do I have to put in front of it? Excellent. I've got to put the plus or minus. So what my answer ends up is x equals plus or minus the square root of 9. What is the square root of 9? 3. So my answer is going to be plus or minus 3. Is plus or minus 3 one answer or two answers? Two answers. Good. Now I still have x squared equals 5. Okay, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. When I take the square root of the right-hand side, what do I have to do? Put the plus or minus. Okay, we've got to put the plus or minus there. So here I end up with x equals plus or minus the square root of 5. Can I simplify plus or minus the square root of 5? No, I can't simplify that. Okay? So my final answer here is x equals plus or minus 3 and x equals plus or minus 5. How many answers is that? 4. Good. I have plus 3. I have negative 3. I have positive square root of 5, and I have negative square root of 5. Okay? Is it okay if I go to the next screen? Okay. Rational equations. Rational equations, probably your favorite thing from last chapter. Rational equations. And we have been doing parts of rational equations all semester. Okay? How do I solve this? What do I do? Excellent. I am going to multiply by the LCD. Okay? I'm going to multiply by the LCD. So, I'm going to start with x minus 1. That's going to be part of my LCD. Is the x in the x minus 1 the same as this x here? No. I have to write that x down. Excellent. Then, do I have the 2 accounted for? No. So, I'm going to have to write the 2 down. So, I actually have 2x times x minus 1. Now, there's one more thing I want us to address early. Anybody know what it is that I want to go ahead and address? Yes, the negative. So that's going to turn into what? And then where am I going to put it? Excellent. Excellent. Okay? Now, I'm going to multiply everything times my LCD, which is 2x times x minus 1. And I'm going to put that over 1. So 3 over x minus 1 times 2x times x minus 1. Okay? That's going to be plus 3 over x minus 1 times 2x times x minus 1. Okay. That equals 5 over 2 times 2x times x minus 1. Okay? So now, my next step is where I'm going to... Oh, did I make a mistake?
Why are we multiplying 3 over x minus 1 twice?
Oh. I see what you're talking about. This right here? Yeah, that should be negative 2 over x. That's what it should be? Okay, I'm about to erase everything and start over, just so I can do it clearly. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so I'm starting over. So I have 3 over x minus 1. I am multiplying that times x minus 1, or I'm actually multiplying it times 2x times x minus 1. Okay, and that's over 1. Then I have plus negative 2 over x, and I am multiplying that times 2x over x minus 1. And then I've got equals 5 over 2 times 2x times x minus 1. Okay, am I good this time? Good. Thank you for pointing that out, because I make mistakes too. Now what we're going to do is if it shows up in the top and the bottom, we are going to cancel it out. So for my first one, I have x minus 1 and I have x minus 1. So I'm left with 3 times 2x. Okay? For my second one, I have x and I have x. Okay, so I'm left with negative 2 times x minus 1. I'm going to go ahead and simplify negative 2 times 2. What's negative 2 times 2? Excellent. So I've got negative 4 times x minus 1. Then I've got 5 over 2 times 2x, x minus 1. The 2 cancels. So now I have 5x times x minus 1. Okay, the good news is we have eliminated all of the denominators, which is the goal. That's what we want. We want to eliminate all of the denominators. The bad news is I have a whole bunch of stuff I need to simplify. So let's get started simplifying that. I have 3 times 2x, which is 6x. I'm going to distribute my negative 4. So I have negative 4x plus 4 equals, I've got to distribute my 5x. So then I'm left with 5x squared minus 5x. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and combine some like terms. I have 6x minus 4x. So I'm left with 2x plus 4 on this side equals 5x squared minus 5x. Okay, I've got to set this equal to 0. I've got to set this equal to 0. So I am going to subtract 2x from both sides. What else am I going to subtract from both sides? The 4. Okay. So, I am left with 0 equals 5x squared minus 7x minus 4. Okay? Now I have a quadratic that I can deal with, but I need more room. Okay? Is it okay for me to erase most of this slide? Does anybody need a picture of it or anything? Okay. So, here we go. I want to check and see if I can factor this. That is always a good idea to see if you can factor it. So I have 5x squared minus 7x minus 4 equals 0. Can I factor this? My product would be negative 20. My sum would be negative 7. So I would think, my brain thinks about, well, negative 10 and positive 2 give me negative 20. Does negative 2 plus 2, or negative 10 plus 2 give me negative 7? It doesn't. Okay? Can this be factored? No, it cannot be factored. So I can use the quadratic formula, or I can use completing the square. Okay? I am going to use the quadratic formula because I don't have a value of 1 for A and my B is odd. So this would just be a whole bunch of chaos. It would be okay and it would still work, but it is a little bit more difficult. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to identify my A, which is 5, my B is negative 7, and my C is negative 4. So I have negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 AC all over 2 times A. Okay. The blue I am plugging in. I am plugging in the values where the blue is. So, I have a negative 7. Okay? I have a negative 7. That is a place that students sometimes make mistakes, so be careful there. Plus or minus the square root. Then I have a negative number squared. What happens when I square a negative number? It becomes positive. That right there is the number one place that students make mistakes with the quadratic formula. When they square a negative number, they don't make it positive. So be careful there. Then I have minus 4, A is 5, and C is negative 4. And that is all over 2 times 5. Now, right here, sometimes students will miss that negative right there because you've got a negative 4 times 5 times a negative 4. But the primary one is when you've got a negative number squared. So now let's simplify. Negative 7 is positive 7. Negative 7 squared, what is that?
49.
Good, and it's positive. Negative 4 times 5 times negative 4. It's positive 80. Negative 4 times 5 is negative 20. Negative 20 times negative 4 is positive 80. Then I'm left with 10 in the bottom. So you're dealing with some big numbers, but when I get to the next step, 129 can't be simplified. So my final answer there is 7 plus or minus the square root of 129 over 10. Okay? Okay, can I move to the next one? Okay, 5 over n minus 3 minus 3 over n plus 3 equals 1. So I want to go ahead and figure out what my LCD is. Is n minus 3 different than n plus 3? Yes, so I have to include both of them. So I have n minus 3 times n plus 3. There is something else that I want to deal with immediately. Any idea what it is? Good. This is going to become plus -3. Okay? So now I am going to multiply everything times n minus 3, n plus 3. Okay? 5 over n minus 3 times n minus 3, n plus 3 over 1 plus -3 over n plus 3 times n minus 3 times n plus 3 over 1 equals 1 times n minus 3, n plus 3 over 1. Okay, and I definitely encourage you to write that step, that multiplying everything by the LCD out. Write that step out. Okay? Now, this is the step where I eliminate all the denominators. I get rid of the denominators in this step, which is the goal. That's what we want to do when we're solving a rational equation. As long as it's got that equation sign in there, you can get rid of all the denominators. So, here I've got n minus 3 and n minus 3. So I'm left with 5 times n plus 3. Okay? My next one, I've got n plus 3 and n plus 3. They cancel. I'm left with -3 times n minus 3. Then I've got n minus 3 times n plus 3. Now, we are going to have to simplify the left-hand side. So we've got a 5 to distribute and we've got a -3 to distribute. What am I going to have to do on this side? What am I going to have to do right there? Excellent. We're going to FOIL. Okay. So I'm distributing first. 5 times n is 5n. 5 times 3 is 15. -3 times n is -3n. -3 times -3 is +9. N times n is n squared. N times 3 is 3n. -3 times n is -3n. -3 times +3 is -9. Now we've got some things to simplify. I have 5n and -3n. That's going to give me 2n. Then I have 15 and +9. What's that going to give me? Okay. Then I have n squared plus 3n minus 3n. Good. And I'm left with -9. Okay. Now, I've got to set it equal to 0. I need to set it equal to 0. So I am going to subtract 2n from both sides. And I'm going to subtract 24 from both sides. So I'm left with 0 n squared. I don't have anything to combine with that -2n, so I just rewrite it as -2n. What is -9 and -24? How about 33? -33. You're good. You're totally fine. Okay. Now, the next question I ask myself is, can I factor it? Can I factor it? I can't factor it. How do we know we can't factor it? I heard it. Say that again. That doesn't necessarily mean I can't factor it. The reason that I can't factor it is, what are the only factors of -33 except one in itself? 11 and 3. Okay? And there is no scenario where 11 and 3 give us -2. Okay, so that's why it can't be factored. Now I need to erase so that we can solve this quadratic. Do you have what you need? Yes.
Why wouldn't you subtract the other way when you're simplifying instead of going minus 24 when I go minus 9?
You could. You certainly could do that. Do you see that n squared? If you do that, you're going to end up with a negative n squared, and that's a lot harder to deal with. So you're going to see in my next step, I'm just going to flip it. I'm just going to move the 0 to the other side and everything to the left. That's a great question. You definitely want to keep your n squared positive. Okay, can I erase? Okay. So I am going to bring this quadratic up. Now, is this a good candidate for completing the square? Yes. Is completing the square the only way I can solve this? No. I can solve it using the quadratic formula. Okay? So if you prefer the quadratic formula, you can certainly use the quadratic formula here. Okay? But this is a nice one for completing the square. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this negative 33 and I'm going to move it to the other side. So I'm going to have n squared minus 2n equals 33. Okay? My next step is to look at this negative 2n. What is half of negative 2? It is negative 1. Half of negative 2 is negative 1. What is negative 1 squared? That is positive 1. So I am going to add positive 1 to both sides. By design, we have created a perfect square trinomial. Okay? We wanted that. So that factors to n minus 1 squared. Okay? That's because two numbers multiplied together that give me positive 1 and add together to give me negative 2 are negative 1 and negative 1. Okay? Now, my next step is to take the square root of both sides. When I take the square root of my right-hand side, what do I have to do? What do I have to put in front of it?
Plus and minus.
Good. So now I have n minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 34. My last step is to bring that 1 over, and I have n equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 34. And that right there is my final answer. Okay. Can I go to the next screen? Okay. We're not going to have a ton of time for you to try these. I want you to take two minutes, and I want you to think about how you would solve these. Okay? The red at the bottom left is Chapter 5 homework. The blue at the bottom right is Chapter 6 homework. It's also in Canvas, but be sure you have those. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and I want you to focus on the process. What would you do to solve this? What's your process? So that's what I want you to write down, the actual words on what you would do to solve it. Okay, now I just want to kind of start talking about that, and then I'm going to solve each of one of these for you. We didn't have the time for you to really be able to do it by yourself. Now, what do I have to do first right here? What do I have to do first? Say it again. Good. I've got to move that 3 to the other side. Okay? I have to set equal to 0. Before I can decide if it can be factored or what method I'm going to use, it's got to be set equal to 0. So that's going to be the first thing that I do. Okay? The next thing I do is I ask myself, can it be factored? Can this be factored? Okay? It would be -9 and -2. So the product would be -9. The sum would be -2. Can it be factored? No, it cannot be factored. Okay? So what method might you choose to do this? Quadratic formula. Okay? You could do completing the square. I would do quadratic formula. That's what I would do. Okay. Now, the second one, what's the first thing that you ask yourself on the second one? Can it be factored? Now, be careful with this one. Be careful with this one, because a lot of students are like, oh, I totally can factor that. Okay? They see that 1, and they see that -2, and they think about this right here. They think about n squared minus 2n plus 1. We don't have plus 1. What do we have? We have -1. Okay, so can this be factored? No, it can't, and it's because of that -1. So be careful there. You could use either method here. What would I likely use? Completing the square, because A is 1 and B is even. So this is a good candidate for completing the square. Okay, now, we don't know what we're going to end up with on that bottom one, on number 3. What should I do first for number 3? Yeah, I got to find my LCD. So I start with my LCD, and then I multiply everything by my LCD. Okay? Are you ready for me to solve these? Can I go to the next screen? Okay. So as we said, the first thing that we needed to do here is we need to move that 3 over. So I end up with 3x squared minus 2x minus 3 equals 0. Okay, we already know it can't be factored. And we already decided that we want to use the quadratic formula. So I have negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. My a value here is what? My b value? C value. Good. Okay, so I have negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2, and I would get in the habit of putting that negative 2 in parentheses. That tells you to square the negative and the 2. When you write it like this, you forget about that negative. And it actually doesn't mean to square the negative. It means just square the 2. So don't write it like this because you won't remember to square the negative. Okay? Minus 4 times A times C. And all of this is over 2 times A. Okay. Now we're going to simplify. Negative 2 is positive 2. Negative 2 squared is positive 4. Negative 4 times 3 times negative 3 is positive 36. You have a negative right here and you have a negative right here. That's why it's positive. And that is all over 6. Okay? 2 plus or minus the square root of 40 over 6. The key, though, is that 40 can be simplified. It has a perfect square factor. What is its perfect square factor? 4. We have 4 times 10. Okay, the reason we picked 4 is because it's perfect. So then, what's the square root of 4? 2. Now, I can simplify this further, but the only reason I can simplify this further is because I have a 2, and a 6. What number goes into the 2, and the 6? What 2 goes into all those? So the 2 goes into 2 one time. Don't lose that 1. 2 goes into 2 one time. 2 goes into 6 3 times. My final answer here is 1 plus or minus the square root of 10 over 3. Okay. Can I go to the next one? Okay. I'm going to complete the square with this one because my A value is 1, my B value is negative. So I'm going to complete the square. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move that negative 1 over to the other side. So I'm adding 1 to both sides. Okay. Half of negative 2 is negative 1, and negative 1 squared is plus 1. X squared minus 2x plus 1 factors. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. When I take the square root of 2, I have to do my plus or minus. So I have x minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 2. And my last step is to add 1 to both sides. So I have x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 2. And that process right there is completing the square. Okay? Okay, I have 7 minutes to do the last one. Can I go to the next screen? Okay. So, I'm going to deal with 2 things in my very first step. I'm going to deal with 2 things. First thing that I'm going to deal with is I'm going to factor right here. Okay? I've got to factor that trinomial before I can do anything else. The other thing that I'm going to deal with is I'm going to deal with that negative. I'm going to make it positive and I'm going to move it to the numerator. So that's what I'm doing in my very first step. So I have x over x minus 4 plus negative 1 over x plus 5. That equals 1 over x squared plus x minus 20 factors nicely to x minus 4 and x plus 5. Okay. Now I am in a situation where I can figure out what my LCD is. Okay. I'm going to look at that bigger denominator first, the one with 2 factors in it, and I'm going to write that down first. I don't have to, but I'm going to because I think I might be covered. So I wrote down x minus 4, x plus 5 first. Then I go here, is x minus 4 covered? Yes. Is x plus 5 covered? Yes. So now I am going to multiply everything times x minus 4 times x plus 5. And all of that is over 1. Okay. So I have x over x minus 4 times x minus 4, x plus 5. Okay. Plus negative 1 over x plus 5 times x minus 4, x plus 5. Equals 1 over x minus 4 times x plus 5. And that is time our LCD of x minus 4, x plus 5. Okay, now I get to cancel stuff out and get rid of my denominators, which is a very good thing. Okay, x minus 4 and x minus 4 cancel. So I'm left with x times x plus 5. X plus 5 and x plus 5 cancel. I'm left with negative 1 times x minus 4. Okay, x minus 4 and x minus 4, x plus 5 and x plus 5 cancel, so I'm left with equals 1. Okay, it's good. I got rid of all my denominators. Now I'm going to simplify. X times x is x squared. X times 5 is 5x. Negative 1 times x is negative 1x. Negative 1 times negative 4 is positive 4. Okay, so now I've got some like terms. I've got x squared plus 4x. Okay, I need to set this side equal to 0. Okay, if I subtract 1 from both sides, what do I get on the left-hand side? Plus 3. Okay, so what I did right there is I subtracted 1 from both sides. Okay, now you may feel like you did something wrong because this one can be factored. You didn't do anything wrong, but sometimes when we get something easy, we get nervous. What does x squared plus 4x plus 3 factor to? I have a product of 3 and a sum of 4. X plus 1, x plus 3. Okay, 3 times 1 is 3. 3 plus 1 is 4. I set each one equal to 0. And my final answer here is x equals negative 1 and x equals negative 3. Now, what if I had been in quadratic formula and completing the square mode? What if I had just been in that mode and because of the chapter that we're in, we just assumed that we couldn't do it? I'm sorry? You're still going to get both answers, and I'm going to show you that. Can I erase this? We got it? Can I erase it? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to show you. I've still got 2 minutes. If I looked at this and I just assumed it couldn't be factored. I just assumed that it couldn't be factored. And I've got x squared plus 4x plus 3. And I looked at that and I said, you know what? I'm going to do completing the square. I'm going to do completing the square. So I've got x squared plus 4x. And then on the other side of this, I'm going to have negative 3. Okay? Now, I'm going to take half of 4. What's half of 4? 2, and then I'm going to square it. What's 2 squared? 4. So I am adding 4 to both sides. So I get x plus 2 squared. That's what x squared plus 4x plus 4 is factored. Equals positive 1. I take the square root of both sides. Don't forget your plus or minus. So I get x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 1. What is the square root of 1? 1. So then I have x plus 2 equals plus or minus just 1, because the square root of 1 is 1. I subtract 2 from both sides, so I get x equals negative 2 plus or minus 1. That's negative 2 plus 1, negative 2 minus 1. Your key is not to stop here. Don't stop there once you realize you can simplify. Okay? Be sure you're aware of all of this. Quiz Friday, class Monday, test December 4th, help session today and Monday.